In the quiet dark before dawn, a four-engine speedboat moved through international waters in the southern Caribbean. The boat was silent, its hull cutting through the waves at high speed. On board were members of the Venezuelan gang known as Tren de Aragua. U.S. officials have now labeled this group as a narco-terrorist organization. The vessel carried a large amount of narcotics. The drugs were heading for the United States or for other nations nearby in the Caribbean. But this time, the shipment would not reach its destination. High above, U.S. surveillance aircraft watched every move. Minutes later, a precise strike would turn the speedboat into a mess of wreckage and smoke on the water. This event marked a new and strong action in America's fight against drug trafficking by cartels. This operation was not an accident. It was the result of weeks of steady intelligence work by U.S. forces. Military experts had put together a picture of Tren de Aragua's movements at sea. They studied where boats were launched from along Venezuela's coast. They mapped the routes across the Caribbean. They found the short times when shipments would race toward their drop-off points. What followed was a carefully planned effort of watching and getting into position. Special operations aircraft, possibly an MQ-9 Reaper drone, kept a constant watch. At the same time, naval forces moved into a position to strike. Every choice and every move was made for one goal: to stop and destroy the boat before it could vanish. The authorization for the mission came directly from the White House, with a personal approval from President Donald Trump. This approval changed the mission from watching to taking action. The strike was surgical. Reports from those close to the operation said that a drone or attack helicopter used precise weapons. The weapons tore through the boat in seconds. The blast lit up the night. It scattered wreckage and ended the mission in a controlled, lethal moment. 11 people on the vessel, all believed to be part of Tren de Aragua, were killed. No civilians were hurt, and no other boats were hit. For the United States, it was a display of overwhelming power. It showed what happens when intelligence, technology, and a firm political will come together. To fully grasp the importance of this strike, one must understand Tren de Aragua. The gang started in Venezuela's prisons. It has spread across Latin America, becoming involved in human trafficking, extortion, and drug distribution.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
In the Caribbean drug corridor, their speedboats are a familiar problem. They are fast, hard to track, and often operate where local police cannot reach them. Each successful drug run does not just mean drugs on the streets. It means more money for the cartels, more power, and more violence being exported. The boat destroyed in the Caribbean was more than just a vessel carrying drugs. It was a symbol of the criminals' belief that they could act without punishment. This was a belief that U.S. forces were no longer willing to allow. The intelligence work behind the mission was deep and thorough. Satellite images, signals, intercepts, and information from people on the ground all came together. This information created a clear picture of how Tren de Aragua's operations worked. Analysts tracked times when radio silence was used. They studied launch times based on the tides. They mapped out where smuggling routes and blind spots at sea overlapped. By the time the four-engine boat left Venezuelan waters, its end was already set. This level of precision is rare in drug fighting. These efforts often focus on seizing drugs rather than on fully stopping the threat. In this case, the goal was not just to stop the shipment. It was to eliminate the threat completely. For the U.S. military, the strike showed a major change in strategy. Past efforts in the region usually focused on seizing things. This meant boarding suspicious boats, taking crews into custody, and seizing the drugs. What happened in the southern Caribbean was different. It was a planned, lethal strike aimed at both the drugs and the people on board. Military officials said the action was a necessary response to a network that had used violence and fear to protect its operations. By destroying the boat, they sent a message. They showed that these waters were no longer safe for cartel runners. The legal basis for the mission was based on national security orders. By calling Tren de Aragua a narco-terrorist group, the U.S. was able to use military force. This is something that normal police work could never justify. The strike was not a single aggressive act. It was the first clear sign of a new strategy. This strategy treats drug trafficking networks as hostile forces that must be taken down with force and precision. In the time right after the event, reactions were strong and divided. People who supported the operation said it was a bold and needed step to stop the flow of drugs into U.S. communities. For families and neighborhoods suffering from fentanyl and cocaine, seeing the destroyed drug boat was more than a news story. It was a sign of justice. However, critics brought up concerns about escalation and using lethal military force in international waters. But in the Pentagon and other agencies, the focus stayed on the results. A major shipment was destroyed, key people were stopped, and a clear signal was sent to every cartel watching. The strategic effects of this mission go beyond just one event. By showing a willingness to carry out precision strikes on boats at sea, the U.S. has created a new level of deterrence. Every cartel crew now planning a run has to consider that they are being watched, tracked, and targeted. They must now think that their next trip could end in fire and twisted metal. This psychological pressure is as valuable as any physical seizure. It disrupts operations, forces networks to change, and gives time for other parts of the drug strategy to take effect. For those on the ground in the Caribbean, the change is clear. U.S. Coast Guard, Navy forces, and surveillance planes are more visible. Their presence is a quiet warning. Local partners in the region, who have long been frustrated by the speed of cartel boats, now see an ally willing to act with decisive force. While the immediate tactical win is clear, the bigger goal is more ambitious. The goal is to break the supply chains that make these networks so strong. The operation also highlights the growing role of technology in modern drug fighting. The precision needed to track, target, and destroy a moving boat in international waters is stunning. It requires a perfect connection between air surveillance, real-time data analysis, and strike platforms that can hit a target with perfect accuracy. In this mission, that connection worked flawlessly. Every sensor, every piece of data, every part of the decision chain worked in sync. This led to a strike that neutralized the threat without a single accidental casualty. For the people behind the screens, it was the result of weeks of discipline and preparation. For the families in the U.S. who have lost loved ones to drug overdoses, this operation means something different. It is not just a tactical victory, but an emotional one. It is a rare moment where the fight against a hidden enemy produced something visible, real, and final. The boat did not just vanish. It was destroyed. Its mission ended. Its operators silenced.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
That kind of closure, even for a moment, matters to communities that have felt alone in a crisis that often seems impossible to win. Even as officials celebrated the strike, they knew that this was only the beginning. The networks that fuel America's drug crisis are large, adaptable, and ruthless. Tren de Aragua will regroup, routes will change, and boats will change. The challenge for U.S. forces is to stay ahead of this evolution. The goal is to make sure this mission is seen not as a single event, but as the start of a sustained campaign. A campaign that changes how drug trafficking works in the Caribbean. Politically, the strike has already become a key moment. President Trump presented the operation as proof of his government's commitment to using every tool to fight the flow of drugs. In speeches and briefings, officials have pointed to the mission as proof that the U.S. will no longer just react. The strategy is now proactive, willing to use force when needed. For the operators who carried out the mission, the aftermath is more quiet. There are no celebrations or headlines for their precision. There is only the knowledge that, on that night, they stopped thousands of doses of narcotics from reaching their markets. In doing so, they struck a blow against a group that has brought violence and misery to every place it touches. The Southern Caribbean strike will be studied for years to come. It is a case study in modern drug fighting. It shows how intelligence, technology, and political resolve can come together to create a result that is both flawless in its tactics and important for the larger strategy. It is also a reminder that in the war against drug networks, the lines between police work and military action are becoming less clear, and that those blurred lines can produce results once thought impossible. In the end, one simple truth remains. A boat that was supposed to deliver destruction instead met its own. A crew that thought it could outrun the law found out it could not outrun precision, and a network that relied on fear and the belief they could act without punishment was reminded that even in the vast Caribbean, there are eyes watching. There is a line that, once crossed, will bring a swift and final reckoning. The boat never had a chance. For weeks, it had been under the unblinking watch of U.S. surveillance. Every movement was logged, every course change noted, every radio message recorded. What started as a small signal on a monitoring screen off the Venezuelan coast grew into a full-scale mission, carefully planned and carried out. This was not a lucky find or a routine patrol. It was the final moment of a quiet, relentless hunt, a hunt that showed the full power of America's surveillance and strike abilities. It signaled a sharp and forceful change in how the U.S. fights drug trafficking at sea. The operation began with intelligence. Advanced systems, some flying high above the earth, had been tracking the boat long before it reached international waters. This was not a random patrol stopping an unlucky smuggler. It was weeks of constant observation. It combined signals intelligence, visual surveillance, and analysis of patterns to build a case that could not be denied. By the time the speedboat's 4 engines started on its final trip north, the U.S. already knew where it had been, who it was connected to, and what it was carrying. The target was a classic piece of cartel equipment. It was a powerful 4-engine go-fast speedboat. These boats are made to outrun law enforcement while carrying huge amounts of drugs to markets. Intelligence linked the boat directly to networks in Venezuela. These groups have been connected to cartels like the Sinaloa and Clan del Golfo. These were not just low-level couriers. They were experienced traffickers who were part of a larger chain that moves billions of dollars of drugs into the U.S. What made this operation different was the response. Instead of waiting for the boat to enter territorial waters, where normal seizures happen, the U.S. chose a more aggressive option. Hours before dawn, as the boat moved through international waters, the order came down. A U.S. Special Operations aircraft, either an MQ-9 Reaper drone or an armed helicopter, was already in position, waiting above the Caribbean. With the location confirmed by surveillance teams, the strike began. The precision was surgical. A kinetic strike tore through the boat, stopping it in seconds. This left no doubt about the mission's goal. This was not a chase or an arrest. It was a deliberate act to stop a threat before it could reach its destination. When the smoke cleared, the vessel was destroyed. At least 11 people linked to the trafficking were dead. The drugs, worth tens of millions of dollars, never made it out of the Caribbean. Behind the dramatic images of the strike lies a wider strategy, one that has been developing for years, but has rarely been carried out with such clarity. The U.S. has long had warships and surveillance aircraft in the region, but in recent months, that presence has grown. At least 8 warships and thousands of personnel are now across the Caribbean. They are turning vast parts of the ocean into a heavily monitored combat zone. The goal is simple: to stop traffickers from having the freedom of movement they have enjoyed for years. This is done by pairing constant surveillance with immediate, decisive action. For military planners, the success of the mission proves that the model works. By combining weeks of intelligence gathering with a fast strike ability, they were able to act before the drugs got closer to U.S. shores. This reduced the risk of high-speed chases, dangerous interdictions, and possible escapes. For law enforcement, it represents a major shift. It is a move away from strategies focused on seizures and arrests. Instead, it prioritizes disruption and deterrence, even if it means taking lives. The stakes driving this shift are clear. Fentanyl and cocaine trafficking through the Caribbean has increased. Traffickers have adapted to tighter controls on land and in the air. They are using faster boats, with longer ranges and more complex routes. Every successful run means hundreds of pounds of drugs hit U.S. streets. This fuels a drug overdose crisis that kills tens of thousands of people each year. Waiting for those shipments to reach territorial waters often means accepting that some will get through. By striking at sea in international waters, the U.S. sends a clear message. No route is safe and no vessel is untouchable. Officials say the operation is part of a larger plan to take the fight to the source. Rather than chasing the symptoms, like street dealers or small seizures, the new strategy focuses on breaking the logistical chains that make large-scale trafficking possible. By destroying boats mid-route, disrupting money networks, and pressuring governments, the U.S. hopes to raise the cost of doing business for the cartels. This forces them to rethink old routes and tactics. What is not in dispute is how advanced the surveillance and strike systems were that made the operation possible. Experts point to the way that signals intelligence, airborne radar, and real-time data links work together. This allowed leaders thousands of miles away to watch the boat's every move and confidently authorize a strike. In practical terms, it showed how much the battlefield has changed. It is no longer defined by lines on a map. It is defined by the ability to see, track, and act with lethal precision anywhere in the world. For the traffickers, the message is chilling. The Caribbean was long seen as a high-risk but manageable path. Speed and stealth could outwit patrols. That calculation changes when every boat is a potential target, and every radio call could lead to a missile strike. The destruction of the Venezuelan drug boat is not just a tactical win. It is a psychological one, a reminder that the old rules no longer apply. Inside U.S. strategy circles, the operation is being studied as a model for future missions. Pairing constant surveillance with fast remote strike capability allows commanders to keep pressure on without exposing their people to unnecessary danger. It also fits with a larger change in thinking. This change sees drug trafficking not just as a police issue, but as a national security threat. This justifies military involvement at a level not seen since the height of the war on drugs. The political response was swift and divided. Some praised the operation as a bold step. Others worried that such aggressive tactics could cause tensions with other governments, especially Venezuela, which has called the strike a violation of its rights. What is clear, however, is that the U.S. is no longer content to play defense. For communities in the U.S., where overdoses are a grim part of daily life, the strike represents action. After years of hearing about drug seizures but seeing little change in the flow of drugs, the image of a cartel boat destroyed at sea carries a weight that numbers cannot. It is a rare, visible sign that someone is not just counting the losses, but is actively trying to stop them. But even as the wreckage settles, officials warn that this is not the end. Cartels are adaptable, resilient, and relentless. Routes will shift and tactics will change. Another boat will leave another port, heading north under another dark sky. What this operation proves is that the tools to meet that threat are sharper than ever. The tools to see it, track it, and stop it before it reaches the shore. This is the reality of the modern drug war at sea. It is a battlefield where intelligence is as important as firepower. Weeks of quiet surveillance build to a moment of sudden, decisive violence. The Venezuelan drug vessel was just one target in a large, changing network. But its destruction marks a line in the sand. It is a declaration that the time of untouchable trafficking at sea is over. It says that the Caribbean, once a highway for drugs, is now a hunting ground. For those watching, the lesson is stark. The U.S. is willing to escalate, to strike, and to carry the fight far from its own shores. For the cartels, the question is no longer whether the U.S. is watching, but how long they have before the next target finds them. It happened fast. A dark vessel, quietly moving through the Caribbean, carrying drugs worth millions, was turned into fire and splinters in a single violent strike. The U.S. military did not try to board the boat. There were no warning shots or a traditional interception. This time, the order was clear: destroy the boat, destroy the drugs, and send a message. A message that could be heard in every port, every cartel safe house, and every meeting room from Venezuela to Miami. Behind the wreckage lies a story that shows more than a tactical win. It signals a strategic shift in how the United States will confront the threat of narco-terrorism. Officials have not said exactly how many drugs were destroyed, but all signs point to a significant load, the kind of shipment that powers entire trafficking chains and that translates into millions of doses on American streets. President Trump put it simply, telling reporters there was a lot of drugs on the vessel. And in the world of drug trafficking at sea, a lot usually means tons, not pounds. Fentanyl, cocaine, heroin. The specific mix is not known. But what matters is the impact. The boat was not just another smuggling run. It was a moving fortune. Its destruction represents a financial and operational blow that Tren de Aragua will feel immediately. To understand the importance of this, you have to understand the enemy. Tren de Aragua is not a loose gang. It is a highly organized, violent narco-terrorist group that has grown from controlling prisons in Venezuela to controlling trafficking routes that feed the US. They are known for ruthless force, extortion, and ties with larger cartels. This makes them a key part of a network of violence and addiction that reaches far beyond Venezuela. This was not just about drugs on a boat. It was about crippling a major supply route of a global criminal operation. The choice to use lethal force marks a clear change from standard tactics. Traditionally, the US Coast Guard and Navy try to board vessels, seize drugs, and arrest crews. This time, there was no court waiting, no chance for talks. By choosing to destroy the vessel, US forces chose strategic disruption over gathering evidence. This signals a willingness to escalate the fight against organized trafficking into something more aggressive and uncompromising. For the traffickers who saw the video of their boat on fire, the message was clear. The rules have changed. From a financial view, the loss is staggering. Even a low estimate would put the street value of that shipment in the tens of millions of dollars. Fentanyl alone, when measured by the dose, turns into huge profits once it reaches city markets. Every gram destroyed represents not just lost money, but disrupted distribution chains, unpaid enforcers, and broken logistics. The strike did not just take out a boat. It took out weeks or even months of planning. And in the criminal world, that kind of hit is felt all the way to the top. But the real impact is in the lives that were possibly saved. Shipments like this are not just an idea. They become overdoses, addicts collapsing in parks, and emergency rooms overwhelmed by fentanyl poisonings. By stopping that payload before it could be sold, the US strike prevented many deaths and shattered families. It is a victory measured not just in money destroyed, but in futures preserved. It is a quiet, immeasurable triumph against a crisis that often feels unstoppable. Strategically, the operation is a statement. For years, traffickers have operated with a certain understanding. If a shipment is stopped or a crew arrested, the loss is manageable. There is always another route, another boat, another corrupt official to look away. What they have rarely faced is a policy of total denial, a willingness to erase both the shipment and the vessel, leaving nothing to salvage. That kind of response forces a change at every level of the supply chain. Routes become more dangerous. Confidence among lower-level operators wears away. Fear becomes part of the equation. For US leaders, this strike also serves a purpose at home, showing resolve. The flow of drugs from Venezuela and the Caribbean has become a political issue. It is tied to rising overdose rates and community suffering. By allowing direct, lethal action, the administration is sending a signal not just to traffickers, but to the public, that the crisis is being met with force, not just talk. The image of the boat in flames is more than proof of an operation. It is a visual story meant to project strength and deterrence. Behind the scenes, the operation showed a high level of intelligence teamwork, finding the vessel, confirming the drugs, tracking its route, and executing a precise strike without harming others required real-time data and flawless communication between agencies. The Caribbean is a busy and complex area. To isolate and stop one target without causing unintended casualties is a feat of modern surveillance and military precision. Still, the strike raises difficult questions. Every escalation has a risk. Cartels and gangs, especially those like Tren de Aragua with violent reputations, do not take humiliation lightly. Retaliation, whether through violence against U.S. forces or intensified smuggling, is a real possibility. And while the destruction of the vessel is a tactical win, the larger war continues. Supply lines are resilient, and the demand driving them is insatiable. This strike disrupts, but it does not dismantle. Still, in a crisis that has claimed hundreds of thousands of American lives, disruption matters. Every shipment stopped forces traffickers to adjust and absorb financial shocks. These shocks, repeated enough times, wear away at their capacity and create openings for further action. It is a long game, but every move like this one shifts the balance, even a little, in favor of those fighting the epidemic. The symbolism of this moment is very important. For decades, traffickers in the Caribbean have seen U.S. enforcement as a known, predictable risk. This strike changes that way of thinking. It brings in an element of unpredictability, a sense that the rules have changed, that the consequences of getting caught are no longer just legal, but are a matter of survival. That unpredictability is a weapon in itself, one that could stop operators from taking risks they once considered normal. For communities in the United States, the news of the strike brought a mix of relief and grim understanding. Relief that one huge shipment would not reach their streets. Understanding that countless others are still on their way. The fight is far from over, but for a brief moment, there is proof that the tide can be pushed back. That decisive action can get real results. For the families who have lost loved ones, for the first responders who give out Narcan every day, for all those on the front lines of this crisis, the strike is more than a headline. It is a reminder that the forces fueling the epidemic are not untouchable, that the machinery of trafficking can be broken piece by piece. It does not erase the losses, but it offers something rare in this war: hope. As the smoke cleared and the wreckage sank, one truth was clear. The rules of engagement have shifted. Tren de Aragua and their allies now know that the U.S. is willing to escalate, to strike first and ask questions later. That knowledge will spread through ports and over encrypted messages. It will reach the rooms where cartel leaders plan their next moves. And for once, those whispers will carry not just defiance, but fear. The strike on the vessel will be debated for months to come. Was it the right call? Did it set a dangerous precedent? Will it cause retaliation? These questions are valid, but one fact is not in dispute. A major shipment of deadly drugs, headed for American shores, never arrived. Lives that would have been lost were saved. And in a war where victories are rare, that is no small thing. In the end, the image of that boat in flames is more than just a successful operation. It is a line in the sand. It says, without a doubt, that the United States will no longer just play defense. It is a declaration to cartels, to gangs, and to anyone profiting from the trade in death. The rules have changed, and the cost of doing business just got a lot higher. It began like countless other runs across the Caribbean. A 4-engine speedboat ripped through the open water under the cover of darkness. The engines roared against the waves, carrying hundreds of kilos of drugs meant for foreign shores. To the smugglers, it was just another night, another risky trip past patrols. But what they did not know was that their every move had already been watched and mapped. For weeks, U.S. military surveillance had tracked their routes and patterns. It waited for the perfect moment to strike. When that moment came, the ocean was hit with precision-guided firepower. It left nothing but flames, wreckage, and the broken myth of Tren de Aragua's invincibility. High-speed boats are the main tool of Caribbean drug routes. They are known as go-fasts and are the backbone of traffickers from Venezuela to the Yucatan. Built for speed and carrying large loads, they sit low on the water. They are designed to avoid radar and outrun most patrol boats. 4 engines at full power can push them past 50 knots. This makes them hard to stop once they are moving. Smugglers rely on that speed as their shield. They use tactics perfected over decades, constantly changing routes, silent satellite communication, and night runs through less patrolled international waters. For years, these methods kept shipments moving. They fueled a pipeline of cocaine, meth, and fentanyl to the US. The men on this boat thought they could not be touched. They had planned the run carefully. A late-night departure, a long trip through neutral waters, and a handoff point far from shore. Corrupt local contacts had promised them that patrol schedules were the same and the route was clear. What they did not realize was that the US had changed its strategy. Intelligence analysts had linked their operation to Tren de Aragua. This Venezuelan criminal group has grown from a prison gang into a transnational trafficking empire. That connection made this run a top target. It put the boat under relentless watch. The surveillance net that closed around them was not just one aircraft or one radar feed. It was a coordinated effort with multiple agencies and advanced systems. Satellites tracked heat and movement patterns. Maritime patrol aircraft logged every change in course. Signals intelligence flagged bursts of encrypted messages. Every tactic the smugglers used was observed, cataloged, and countered. The crew thought they were invisible in the open water. In reality, they were shadows on a US operations board with a strike plan being prepared just for them. For weeks, the surveillance was passive. This allowed the smugglers to grow comfortable. Each successful trip built confidence, and that confidence led to predictable patterns. By the time the order to act was given, the operators knew not just where the boat would be, but when. The smugglers had unknowingly planned their own destruction. When the strike came, it was fast, precise, and without mercy. A US Special Operations aircraft, with sensors that could track the boat in total darkness, locked onto the target. There was no warning, no chase, no demand to surrender. A burst of force tore through the hull. It set off fuel and cargo in a fireball that lit up the night sky. In less than a minute, the operation was over. 11 suspected members of Tren de Aragua were dead. The boat, the drugs, and the belief that speed equals safety were gone. For US officials, the strike was more than a tactical success. It was a deliberate message. For months, Tren de Aragua had expanded its reach in the Caribbean. They used Venezuela's weak security to run drugs and weapons without being punished. The gang had become bold. They showed their influence in ports, corrupted officials, and used violence to control routes. By turning this trip into a public humiliation, US forces aimed to remind every trafficker that no amount of speed, stealth, or corruption could guarantee safety from a patient, prepared adversary. The operation also highlighted a key change in how the US handles trafficking at sea. For years, efforts focused on direct chases, but speedboats, with their low profiles and extreme velocity, often outran those efforts. Surveillance-led targeting flips that script. By tracking patterns and waiting for the right moment, US forces can strike when the smugglers are committed to a course and cannot scatter or hide. It is a strategy that trades speed for certainty, and in this case, it was devastatingly effective. For Tren de Aragua, the psychological blow may be even more damaging than the loss of drugs. The gang's power rests on the idea that they are untouchable. Watching a supposedly safe, high-speed trip end in flames shatters that illusion. It forces every operative to reconsider the risk. Fear, once a weapon used by the cartel, now works both ways. International waters, once a sanctuary for traffickers, offered no protection. Operating beyond coastal laws has been a standard tactic for smugglers. But with global maritime law and the US right to stop transnational crime, the gang's safe zone was not safe at all. The strike showed that geography no longer grants immunity, a lesson that will spread far beyond the Caribbean. This operation also exposed a hard truth. Speed and stealth alone are no longer enough. The technology used against traffickers today makes it almost impossible to stay truly invisible. Every course change leaves a digital trail. Every radio message is traceable. The only reason the smugglers were not stopped sooner was strategic patience. The US did not want just an interception. It wanted a decisive, undeniable kill that would be felt across the region. For US forces, the payoff was immediate. Statements and images were released. The language was sharp, calling the outcome a humiliation for Tren de Aragua. This was not just about taking out one boat. It was about controlling the story, projecting dominance, and planting doubt in the minds of anyone considering the next run. The regional effects are significant. The Caribbean has long been a favored route for drugs headed to the US. If traffickers now believe that even their fastest boats can be tracked, targeted, and destroyed, they will have to adapt. This often means using methods that are less efficient. Slower methods mean fewer shipments and smaller payloads. For groups like Tren de Aragua, that means less money, less influence, and more internal friction. The human cost of this strike is a clear part of the conflict, but to US strategists, that cost is part of a larger plan. Every stopped shipment means thousands of doses that will not reach American streets. Every destroyed vessel is a blow to the infrastructure of organized crime. It's a fight of endurance and will. What started as a strike on a single boat has become something larger, a test of strategy. And in that test, every outcome, retaliation, adaptation, collapse, is a possibility to prepare for. It's a path toward a region where cartel power doesn't just fade away, but finally begins to recede.